What happens when the cattle queen dared him to train her wild stallion? 30 ranchers failed. The struggling cowboy won. Witness this unbelievable, true inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The dust rose in thick clouds as another rancher limped away from the corral, clutching his ribs and muttering curses under his breath. That made 30 experienced cowboys who had tried and failed to break the wild black stallion that belonged to Margaret Sullivan, the woman they called the cattle queen of Montana. Margaret stood by the fence, arms crossed, her face weathered by years under the prairie sun, but her eyes still sharp as a hawk's. She had built her empire from nothing after her husband died, transforming a failing homestead into the largest cattle operation in 3 counties. But this horse, this magnificent beast of midnight black with fire in his eyes, had become her greatest challenge. The stallion paced inside the corral, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat, nostrils flaring with each breath. He had been captured wild from the mountains 6 months ago, and in all that time, not a single man had managed to stay on his back for more than 8 seconds. Most didn't even make it that far. Word of Margaret's challenge had spread across the territory. She offered $100, a small fortune in 1876, to anyone who could train the stallion. Cowboys came from as far as Texas and California, each one confident they would be the one to succeed, each one left defeated, sometimes injured, always humbled. On a cold October morning, a stranger rode into Margaret's ranch on a tired bay mare. He was thin, almost gaunt, with clothes that had seen too many seasons and boots worn down at the heels. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across a young face marked by hardship. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old. The ranch hands barely looked up from their work. Another fool come to try his luck, they figured. Probably be gone by sunset. But Margaret noticed something different about this one. While the others had strutted with confidence, this young man approached with quiet observation. He didn't head straight for the corral. Instead, he spent an hour just watching the stallion from a distance, studying every movement, every reaction. His name was James Morrow, and he had a story written in the lines of his weathered face. He had lost his family's small ranch to drought and debt 2 years prior. Since then, he had drifted from job to job, working as a stable hand, a ranch worker, anything that would keep him fed. He had no reputation, no fancy credentials. What he did have was desperation and something else, something that couldn't be bought or taught. When James finally approached Margaret, he didn't boast about his abilities. He simply asked, "Ma'am, may I have 3 days with him? Just me and the horse, nobody else around." Margaret raised an eyebrow. The other cowboys had demanded immediate attempts, wanting to prove their prowess quickly. This request was unusual. But something in the young man's steady gaze made her nod. 3 days. But if he kills you, I'm not responsible. James smiled for the first time. Fair enough. What happened over those 3 days became legend in Montana territory. James didn't try to ride the stallion on the first day. He didn't even enter the corral. He simply sat outside the fence, sometimes talking softly, sometimes silent, just being present. The ranch hands laughed, calling him crazy, saying he was wasting everyone's time. On the second day, James entered the corral but made no move toward the horse. He walked around the perimeter, occasionally stopping to sit in the dust. The stallion watched him warily, sometimes charging toward him only to veer away at the last moment. James never flinched, never ran. He simply waited. Margaret watched from her office window, intrigued despite herself. She had seen every technique imaginable, from brutal force to clever tricks, but never this, whatever this was. The evening of the second day, something shifted. The stallion approached James while he sat cross-legged in the center of the corral. The great beast lowered his head, sniffing the air around this strange human who showed neither fear nor aggression. James remained perfectly still. For 10 minutes they stayed, like that, predator and prey suspended in a moment of mutual assessment. On the morning of the third day, the entire ranch gathered to watch. James entered the corral with a saddle blanket and nothing else. The stallion didn't run for hours. James worked with careful, deliberate movements. He let the horse smell the blanket, draped it gently across the broad back, removed it, repeated. There was no fight, no battle of wills. It was a conversation conducted in silence and patience. By late afternoon, James had a bridle on the stallion. By evening, a saddle. The crowd held its breath. Every other cowboy had reached this point, only to be violently thrown the moment they tried to mount. James placed his hand on the horse's neck, speaking words only the stallion could hear. Then, with movements as smooth as water, he swung into the saddle. The stallion tensed. Everyone expected the explosion of bucking, the wild fury that had defeated 30 men. But it didn't come. The horse took one step, then another. James guided him gently around the corral, and the black stallion, the unconquerable beast, walked as calmly as if he had been doing this his entire life. The silence was deafening. Then someone started clapping, and soon the entire ranch erupted in cheers. Margaret stepped down from her porch, something close to amazement on her usually stern face. James dismounted and led the stallion to her. He was never wild, ma'am, just scared and angry. Sometimes the strongest thing isn't the hardest hand, but the most patient one. Margaret paid him the $100, but she also offered him something more valuable, a job as her head horse trainer. James accepted, and under his care, Margaret's ranch became famous not just for its cattle, but for its horses. Animals trained with respect, rather than broken by force. The struggling cowboy who had lost everything found more than employment that day. He found purpose, respect, and eventually, partnership. Within 3 years, James had saved enough to buy into the ranch. Within 5, he and Margaret married, joining their strengths to build something greater than either could have alone. The black stallion lived 20 more years, never allowing anyone but James and Margaret to ride him. A living reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in overpowering others, but in understanding them. And that's the incredible story of how patience and understanding triumphed where force and bravado failed. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, hit that like button and subscribe to Whisper of the Past for more amazing true stories from history. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Until next time, remember that sometimes the quietest voice carries the most wisdom.